Let's start sewing. First of all, we have some small pieces that correspond to the inner and outer pieces. The inner piece can be interfaced with a thin cotton plain weave if we want to, just like this white one I'm using for the outer piece. Never use fusible interfacings for the sleeves. On the other hand, we also have the same pieces cut in lining fabric. Notice that we have to cut 1 cm from the bottom of the sleeve in the lining pieces and not from the outer sleeve pieces. The lining has to be 1 cm shorter. Additionally, we have our large piece will gather and which will provide all the volume for the sleeve. I'm not going to interface it, but we could do it. We have some notches on the bottom and top areas, pretty close to the top of the sleeve head. We have to gather all that segment between the bottom and top notches. You can gather it with the machine, by hand, or with whichever method you want. Once we have the gathers on both sides, we'll take the pattern piece of the outer base sleeve piece. Starting from the bottom of the sleeve, we'll align the whole contour of both patterns, of both pieces. The bottom area before the notches will be exactly the same, it will be flat. But from the notches towards the sleeve head, we'll have to adapt the gathers to the contour of the base piece. Likewise, the top part of the sleeve head between the notches will also remain flat. I've held everything with pins for now. I personally don't like sewing garments with pins on them, mainly in parts like this that have so much volume, because we can get hard or things may move. So, optionally, we can base the contour of both pieces. Next, we'll take the inner piece and we'll place them right to right to sew the seams. My advice is to start on the back because it's the longest seam. Make stitching by seam allowance. Press the seam so that the seam allowance is facing towards the inner piece. As it is a slightly curved seam, we can notch it. If you're using a delicate fabric, place a cloth on top of it so the iron won't damage it. Next, we'll sew the other side. Place the sides right to right, hold with pins and pass a stitching. Now, all the volume of the sleeve will be on the inside, so it may be a bit harder to align the pieces, but it can be done. Notch it and carefully press it. Same thing, the seam allowance will be facing the inner piece. You can use any of the different tailor's cushions to press it more easily. Now that we have the outer sleeve, we'll work on the lining. Reserve this one. It's also worth mentioning that the lining is always optional. If you don't want lining, you can overlock the inside of the outer sleeve. Anyways, if you're doing the lining, we'll align the outer and inner pieces by the sides, placing the pieces right to right and following the same steps we've just done. I'll give them for granted. Here you can press the seam open. Think that the lining of the sleeve must be mirrored from the outer sleeve, so that once one is inside the other, the right side of the lining will be on the inside. With the lining ready, get the outer sleeve back and we'll push the outer sleeve inside the lining, so that the right sides of both will be facing each other. Align the side seams of the sleeves. All the sleeve bottom must be well aligned. Once it's held in place, pass a stitching along all the contour of the bottom of the sleeve. Turn it inside out and put the lining inside the outer sleeve. What will we do now? If we look at the outer sleeve's seam allowance, we'll see it is 2.5 centimeters wide. We're going to fold those 2.5 centimeters inwards and we'll mark the hem with the iron. That could also be done before sewing the lining. To avoid the hem folding outwards, for it not to unfold, we're going to fix it on the inside. To do that, we'll pull the lining out again and leave the inside of the outer sleeve visible. As we have the hem marked with the iron, we can fold it again in the shape it needs. Notice that the lining is also going upwards. And now, by hand, we can fix the whole hem to the inner layer, the one acting as a base, the cotton plate weave, for the hem not to move anymore. And because we're only sewing it to the inner base, no stitching will be visible from the outside. For fixing it, you can use slip stitches, cross stitches, or any kind of stitching you like. If you're not lining the sleeve, you can make a stitching or fixing it only on the seams. Earlier, we cut the lining 1 centimeter shorter, so now it won't come out of the bottom of the sleeve. That's why we did it. Finally, we're going to base the armholes of the lining and the outer fabric sleeves together so that both fabric layers, both pieces, will act as a single one. Before sewing the sleeve to the body, optionally, if the armhole on the sleeve has a bit more slack, if it's a bit longer on the sleeve head than the armhole on the body, with a long stitch and a loose tension on the sewing machine, you can make a couple of stitchings from one notch to the other on the area that's not already gathered, without backstitching the start and end to later pull a bit those threads without gathering the piece. But this way will ease in the sleeve head seam and will make the lengths to match. This is optional, depending on the finishing we want on the sleeve head. Both stitchings have to be parallel. and with about half a centimeter distance in between, and they have to be inside the seam allowance or they would be visible otherwise. Here you can see what they look like from the inside, where they're more visible. If we now pull the threads just enough so it's not gathered, you can see the sleeve head taking shape. Finally, we'll sew the armhole to the body, starting with the side seam of the body. Align it with the notch we have around the center of the inner piece, and from there, we align the front and back armhole notches and the shoulder notches. Placing the pieces right to right, hold it all in place and make stitching by seam allowance. It's just a standard sleeve seam. This time we're sewing the lining and the sleeve in one go, but there's another option. There are many methods. If you prefer so, you could sew the outer sleeve and the lining separately to the body. The finishings we make on the armhole will depend on the garment we're adding the sleeve to. If it has a lining or not will be something that will depend on the design. With that, we're done sewing this sleeve.